This session has got an extraordinary title, Trends Shaping Technology, Business and Society, the whole future of the world in 60 minutes. It's a bit ambitious, but I think we're going to focus more, given the last year in which it's been easier to predict flying cars than to predict what's going to happen in society and politics. I think we'll focus more on the radical technology trends, bringing in a bit of the business and society along the way. And we're going to start by being upbeat, because I think we need a bit of upbeat stuff. I want to get our four very distinguished panelists to talk about exciting trends in their field that they think are going to change the world over the next 5 years, to try and look optimistically into the future, and then I'll pour a bucket of cold water on them quite soon after that. And I'm going to start with Joe Bertram, who's General Manager UK, Ireland and the Nordics for Uber. Joe, Uber is playing a central role in radical change in the way we get about our cities. Is that what you're focused on? Is that what excites you over the next 5 years, the transformation of our cities, of the way we move?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things we realized as the company developed is the possible impact it can have on cities. When our founders thought of the idea, the concept was just to get you from A to B at the touch of a button. But as the business grew, we realized it could be so much more. For example, in some of the cities around the world, including London, we've launched Uber Pool, where we saw that lots of people were taking very similar duplicate journeys, going from the same place at the same time to roughly the same place. And we're able to use our data and technology to match them. So the customer gets a cheaper journey, the driver has more fare-paying passengers in his or her car, and of course there's one less car on the road. And so we really see that with a combination of forms of transport like Uber, public transport, taxis, Boris bikes, through all of those, you can actually reduce the need for individuals to own their private car, and hopefully start thinking of mobility as more of a service that you can get at the tap of a button on your smartphone, rather than needing that personal asset of having a car.
Brent Hoberman, one of Britain's biggest .com movers and shakers, man about town. Sorry, no, it says here, executive chairman of Founders Factory, right, okay. You pride yourself on being immersed in the latest trends. We're hearing a lot about virtual reality, augmented reality, AI. Are those the things that are firing you up at the moment?
I mean, we're definitely excited about all of those. So at Founders Factory, we're backed by large corporates, and we help them innovate across multiple sectors. We're about to launch an AI sector, but with a large Chinese conglomerate. We have a fintech one.
Can I break that here?
Yeah.
Break that
No,
news
I'm
here?
afraid we've announced it. We've announced
right.
it.
We want news.
Yeah, sorry, China Science and Merchants Corporation. But I mean, I think just talking about you, going back to your prior question about sort of the big trends being positive and negative, I think when I look at many of the companies we're incubating or accelerating, they are leading to automation. They're either saving costs or they are transforming jobs, actually. And I think that's still, to me, one of the most interesting questions is, you know, and I think it was yesterday that the Governor of Bank of England said he thinks 15 million of the 31 jobs. I mean, this is a terrible day.
You're bringing in that downer. I was going to bring that downer in a bit later.
But look, no, but I think the positive thing is that, you know, for less money, people can have a much better time. And so one of the ones we're doing is, you asked about virtual reality for education. We've got a company coming in called Discover Labs. We're doing a whole event on VR in education and medicine next week. So all these companies that are helping. So that means, I think, I always used to say when I ran lastminute.com, we were only as good as our worst, travel agents were as good as their worst customer service agent, and I wanted to be as good as our worst line of code. So I think in terms of transforming customer experience, these sorts of businesses that use the latest technologies like virtual reality and artificial intelligence and even blockchain, we've got another one doing blockchain as well, to massively take out complexity out of these systems. They do lower costs for the consumer and get you.
Are you a blockchain believer? There's a huge amount of hype around blockchain at the moment.
Look, I'm a believer
kind of
because
a bit like gold bugs, aren't
yeah,
they?
I mean, I'm a believer because we have a company here. It's sort of part of our model. We're backed by Aviva in this sector. If a company can persuade Aviva to roll blockchain solutions out across large chunks of its business, then I think that's taking massive complexity, massive cost, so I think I'm a believer when I see that, and we're close to making that happen.
Colin Leduc, partner, co-founder, co-CIO, growth equity strategy, generation investment management, and he told me last night, Tesla driver in California, a man who's in touch with the future. You're very excited about sustainability and green energy at a time when some people are becoming a bit less excited about that. Why do you retain your enthusiasm and your conviction that we're moving towards a more sustainable economy?
Sure, thank you. So at Generation, we're sustainable investors. We invest in basically businesses that are trying to address some of the big sustainability challenges of the world. And I think that obviously includes the transition to clean energy, but also involves transition to clean food and other mobility systems and other things that we could talk about. But if I just focus in specifically on the energy side very briefly, I think a couple of things have really got us quite excited over recent times. I think we've basically reached some thresholds in recent years which have kind of been long in the making, but are suddenly enabling just adoption to happen at a much, much faster pace. So the obvious kind of one is the price of solar panels. They've come down a lot in a relatively short space of time, which has made solar incredibly affordable to a lot of people. That cost down curve is also true in other areas of fundamental clean technologies like LEDs, for example. The other space that we're quite interested in, which is also benefiting from this kind of virtuous cycle, I should say, of adoption driving further cost down curves and further innovation, is on the electric vehicle side and on the battery cost sharing side, and the sharing and the autonomy and all of those different things that come with electric vehicles. So I think the key point is that we've reached these thresholds around cost curves simultaneously, and that is enabling adoption to happen very, very quickly. The other thing I think is quite interesting is the confluence of kind of these fundamental core clean technologies becoming cost effective just at a time when you're seeing incredible digital technology and financial technology also innovating at the same time, which is enabling entirely new business models.
How important for your sort of vision of sustainable energy is the oil price? Obviously, what happened to the oil price over the last couple of years has been pretty bad for you guys, hasn't it? It's suddenly made the urgency of moving to different forms of energy seem less urgent.
I think you've got to remember that oil is primarily a transport fuel rather than an electricity generating fuel. So, within that context, if you think about one of the beauties of renewable energy is that the fuel is free, right? The sun and the wind is free. So once you've installed the generating systems, the variable input price is zero in perpetuity. So versus, the big advantage of renewables is essentially the predictability of pricing. We in the States, for example, Walmart made a commitment a few years ago to go 100% renewable. And Walmart has got the second most roof space in the United States after the US government. And they basically have committed to go 100% renewable because they want to know the price of their energy. The oil price has nothing to do with that. The point is that they can't predict. Walmart couldn't predict the price of natural gas tomorrow, but they can predict the price of the sun, and that is the kind of big advantage. So I would say that when it comes to the oil price, the only thing you know about the oil price is it's going to be volatile, and no one knows what it's going to be tomorrow. So that is a big disadvantage. The other thing I would say around fossil energy generally is that it is a finite resource, and the sun is infinite, so there's a big difference there.
The other thing which is very volatile is presumably US energy policy from next year. Are you optimistic about that?
Look, we'll maybe come on to talk a little bit more about what's going on in the US policy arena, but I think one of the fundamental points I wanted to make here was that many of these clean technologies have now got to a point where they don't need policy support. So these are just better products and better services. They needed policy to get to a certain point, and certainly policy helps, right? But when you've just got superior products like electric cars, for example, that just outperform internal combustion engines on many different levels, like safety and all these other things, let alone efficiency and just kind of driver performance. A lot of this adoption is just being driven by the fact these are superior products and services. So that is policy independent. I would say the other thing about the US is that the states themselves are very powerful versus the federal government. So, even though Trump's talking about dismantling the Paris Agreement and pulling out of that and all these different things, places like California and New York are just continuing to power ahead with the transition to a clean economy. So, that will not change in the face of Trump's stated position, which nobody really knows what he's going to do anyway. So, we'll see.
Ed Vaizey, I've put you down here as battle-scarred politician. 6 years as Minister for the Arts, is that right? You were record-breaking Minister for the Arts.
Yeah.
Hugely hip in the gaming community. Believe it or not, he was really quite popular, this crusty old Tory in the video gaming community. He managed to con them into thinking he was a big dude in...
I'm enjoying this stream
yeah,
of consciousness.
yeah, I know.
What the
Stream of
BBC...
consciousness, yeah, where's this
What
coming
the BBC really thinks of me.
Yeah.
Rory's just angry because I bullied him into comparing this session.
He sent me a direct message on Twitter, and, what else can you do? But seriously, you've sort of presided over the digitization of the UK economy for the last 5 or 6 years. I don't know if you claim that.
No, it was all down to me.
Yeah. Do you see that process proceeding, and has it achieved much so far?
I think the great challenge for the UK, particularly in a Brexit environment, let me be the first to mention Brexit, is obviously to keep its leadership in tech. And I think people like Brent Hoberman can take much more credit for that over the last 5 or 6 years. But certainly in 2010, you got a government that actually, I think, came in with a huge commitment to the tech community. And it became a very sort of porous relationship. And I don't mean that in a sinister way. It meant that there was an ongoing dialogue with the tech community. And lots of important changes were made, whether it was putting coding in the national curriculum or the advances we made in digital government. And we are seen, I think, still in Europe as the leading tech nation. So it was incredibly frustrating, obviously, for me as a Remainer to see us coming out of Europe, particularly with things like the digital single market, where the UK could still be potentially, but could have been very, very influential. So I think, obviously, we've lost a bit of momentum because the government's got other things to think about. But I do understand the government is going to publish a digital strategy quite soon. It was a digital strategy I was working on.
We've been promised that for months.
I know, I was working on it.
You promised me that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was working on it back in January, but it is due, I heard, to be published before the end of this year. And it will concentrate on the kind of things that Brent and others have talked about where we have leadership and where the government can focus its efforts. Because I think what the government has been very good at doing is sort of pump priming various industries, whether it's AI or whether it's cyber, and so on and so forth. And I think there are other advances we can make. For example, you mentioned the blockchain earlier. The chief scientist published our policy paper on blockchain in the spring. We've just published a policy paper, the government's just published a policy paper on artificial intelligence. So government leadership in this area is very important. But
how can the government lead in artificial intelligence?
Well, what I would say, because I think I was literally about to answer that, because I knew you'd think it was a facetious remark. I think people underestimate how important it is for government to be a cheerleader over and above specific policies. Simply to be talking about these issues, to say that, for example, George Osborne setting up the trade body Innovate Finance was a leadership role in saying that the UK is a great home for fintech innovation. Publishing a strategy on AI is saying we in the UK want to be leaders in artificial intelligence. And things like the sort of DeepMind deal with the Department of Health are also very exciting. The hurdle we've got to come across is, this is about rapid change, and people are suspicious and nervous, understandably, about rapid change, and the health issue is a very good example of where I think a very good and innovative way forward comes up against understandable public suspicion. But I do think we've lost momentum over the last few months for very understandable reasons. The UK needs to regain momentum, and the government has to show that it's very committed to the tech industry and to particular sectors within the tech industry where the UK can play a leadership role.
Let's talk about the speed of automation, the process of automation. Brent's already mentioned Mark Carney's speech yesterday, in which he and it's the lead story in the Daily Mail today. 15 million jobs at threat from robots. What's interesting about that line is actually he's quoting from a now discredited Oxford report, which is now seen to have vastly exaggerated the threat. Nevertheless, Joe, I mean, you're in a business whose long-term vision is probably getting rid of all those nice drivers that played Radio 4 to me as I drove home in an Uber last night. The technology industry is just waking up to the fact there's a huge gulf between it and a lot of the population, isn't it? That it paints this glowing picture of this wonderful new society, and a lot of people don't buy into it.
Yeah, I mean, the pace of change question is a really interesting one when you think of Uber, because Uber's only been around 6 years. So it's amazing to think, I mean, even the technologies that we rely on were probably not around 10 years ago. And it's amazing to see the changes that Uber's brought in cities. So here in London now you can get a car in 3 minutes pretty much any time of day or night. So there's already been a huge change. There's some really exciting developments with self-driving vehicles from Uber and from other companies. I think there's still a long way to go, but equally they can be very, very exciting. There's a
lot of hype around. Let's just cut through the hype about self-driving. I mean, because the technology is that we've made huge progress in that technology, and all sorts of things are now feasible. Whether they are practical or desirable is another matter, isn't it? I mean, let me hit Brent with this. Are we going to see our cities filled with self-driving cars within the next 10 years? Because I very much doubt it.
I think we absolutely will, and I think what's going to happen is we're going to look back at the days when we allowed teenagers and people to drive drunk and these dangerous, and think it's much more dangerous to have a human being driving a car. And we're going to look back at this as the age of irresponsibility. I mean, we know how many people get killed by drivers. It's one of the largest causes of young deaths is car accidents. So I'm convinced that technology will be safer than human beings because we're only human.
But we're going to have a mix. Yeah. Now, Colin admitted to me last night. Colin has got this Tesla, which is capable of self-driving. I've driven one.
That's the point.
Well, yeah, that's scary. I put it into autopilot, and I sat there on the freeway like that, terrified. And at one point, it tried to leave the freeway, and I had to wrest back control. But isn't that the problem? That we're at an intermediate stage, which is almost more dangerous than full autonomy. And Silicon Valley has got this boundless optimism, which sometimes gets ahead of reality.
Sure.
You live right in the middle of it.
Yeah. Look, I think the I think the notion of self-driving, I think it's more helpful to think about a connected vehicle or an integrated mobility system and an autonomous type of driving rather than self-driving per se, because that's quite a narrow way of thinking about the mobility model that is emerging. I do think that this is coming way quicker than people anticipate. And if you listen to both the CEOs of BMW and VW, who have made some recent pronouncements about how quickly they expect this to happen. This is not just Elon Musk talking about this. I mean, the BMW CEO the other day said that by 2025, right, which is not actually that far away, they expect EVs to be more than 50% of car sales. At the moment, they're about 1% of car sales.
And where am I going to plug my EV in my terraced house in London? Am I going to be running an extension cable across the pavement?
So there's maybe. A lot of people do that today.
My neighbours are not going to like it, I can tell you.
I think it's
my point is a serious one. That actually, what holds a lot of this back is infrastructure. We in this country have spent 50 years talking about building another runway.
So I think the point would be that the point would be like, why do you need a car if you live in a terraced house in West London? I think that's more the point, because the cars are. No, I'm serious. I mean, we're.
Well, no, I'm happy to sell mine to you if you like.
I'm saying,
I'll swap it with your Tesla.
It's shared autonomous, connected electric, right? That's where we're going,
Yeah.
right? And so you'll
It's a
be able
great
to
vision.
summon, you'll be able to summon an electric Uber to come and pick you up and take you to the BBC studios, whatever. You don't need a car. So, you know, the VW CEO the other day said, look, the OEMs have got a crisis of purpose. That is, you know, the model of selling individual cars to individual people is over. And that model is fundamentally challenged because of the technology innovation that's happening. So, you know, there will be ways for the self-driving Uber or the autonomous Uber, whatever, to go and charge itself to make sure that it can get you from A to B. So, you know, we've been through peak coal, right? We're going through peak ICE, internal combustion engine car. And if you look at the prevalence of how many young people are getting driver's licenses today, it's completely fallen off a cliff. You know, young people just don't see the need to have it to be able to drive anymore. So,
but Ed, this is going to require a lot of activism from government.
Yeah, exactly.
It's going to require governments, for instance, to ban diesels from central London to both be prescriptive and incredibly active and investing in all sorts of infrastructure, turning every street light into a charging point. Do you see the appetite in government for that kind of activism?
Yes, I do. I mean, but I do think your point is a very valid one. And, you know, I've been sort of 10 years in this sector waiting for various different tipping points. And, of course, they're impossible to predict. For 10 years, I've been expecting the death of linear live television. That hasn't happened. But I do now think...
Sorry.
I do think we are about to reach a tipping point where that may well start to happen. At the same time, the smartphone and the tablet, you know, I can still remember Brent coming back from the US with the first iPad, and that was 6 years ago. Now, it'd be, you know, it's ridiculous if you don't have a smartphone. So different things move at different paces. So I'm sure, you know, self-driving cars, the advances, particularly made, you know, it's worth remembering a lot of it made by the private sector, albeit in conjunction with government research, have been astonishing. But what we need now is the infrastructure. And I suspect, for example, with self-driving cars, the first innovation, which will, I think, be government-led, might be, for example, trucks. It might be convoys of trucks that go at a certain time of the day on certain routes and to test it out. But it will take a while. And you're quite right, with electric vehicles, again, the transformation has been astonishing in terms of the battery technology. And it will now become much more normal to buy a very advanced hybrid or an all-electric vehicle. The problems will be the infrastructure. But that can change very quickly. You know, we are used to going into a petrol station and filling up. There is no reason why we couldn't, in 10 years' time, see pretty much every petrol station in this country effectively being an electric charging station. And the key will be that you can pull in and charge your car in 5 minutes in the way you can fill up your car at the moment in 5 minutes. So technology and infrastructure changes have to move hand in hand, but there is a role, clearly, for government in helping move this along. And again, it goes back to my opening remarks. It's not just government cheerleading, government practically saying we are getting behind this technology, we are open to this technology, and we will try where we can to remove bureaucratic hurdles, either hurdles in terms of regulation or hurdles in terms of infrastructure support that this technology needs.
Colin, first.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo a point about the non-linearity of change. You know, the whole Dieselgate thing to me was just an incredible example of how quickly things can change. So in particular in the European car pool, diesel has been seen as, you know, an answer to, you know, basically more sustainable transportation. Right, that changed very, very quickly, and you know the diesel sales have basically fallen off a cliff following what happened in terms of cheating. The other point, and obviously that the beneficiary there has been a massive uptick in electric vehicle sales because people just do not trust diesel anymore. The other thing to say is that these mobility solutions that are emerging, it's not a one size fits all, right? So what works in London and New York or whatever is very different to what's going to happen in, you know, sort of you name it city around the world. So we're looking at a business at the moment that's in a Southeast Asian city that's very, very focused on two-wheelers. You know, they want to leapfrog away from the idea of individual cars for individual people to, you know, shared mobility solutions that actually work for an emerging market city. And so, you know, I think we need to think about this as horses for courses in terms of the types of cities that are emerging. And London is obviously very, very unique versus some of the cities that are emerging.
Brent, did you want to come in on the government cheerleading point of view? Or
Well, I can come in on that. I'll just quickly, I mean, I think one interesting way. Some of these things, as you say, they're non-linear, and other solutions can come out there. So it was interesting to hear Mayor Bloomberg's team talking about basically the solar roadways type solution. So the idea, A, you could paint solar panels onto roads and you could charge for that. B, you don't need to do image recognition then, because the car can just follow a line in the road rather than relying on image recognition. So there, to your point of being worried about accidents, that might be another way that you don't have to worry about snow.
And coming back to the question of jobs, frankly, this is the big fear that keeps coming up. I was just talking to Joe before we started. There's a very interesting video that Amazon put up yesterday, which shows a guy walks into a shop, puts a sandwich in his pocket and walks out. A woman walks in, puts a ready meal into a handbag and walks out. It looks like shoplifting. It's a new Amazon. It's magic.
It's auto magically.
And this, I think what's fascinating is the way this video, which basically shows a vision of the shop of the future where everything is probably RFID tagged, you're all Amazon Go members, your smartphone recognizes that you're in the shop and automatically charges you as you walk out with the sandwich. So Silicon Valley and tech enthusiasts have gone, wow, this is extraordinary. Other people have said 3.5 million people in America work behind the checkout in supermarkets. All their jobs are toast. Those are the people who just voted Trump. That's the dilemma, isn't it?
And it's absolutely the future, and you can't stop it. And Amazon are quite right to be at the forefront of it, and it is going to happen. And where you can automate things, there's no way you can stop it. The question is, what policy decisions can you do? Can you re-educate for people for jobs that I lack the imagination to think of where they're going to come from, so I worry about where they might. But there's a massive debate in Silicon Valley about very smart people saying they're going to come. We didn't see it with the Industrial Revolution. We know these jobs are going to be created. So that's the optimist view.
The big study of this, which, as I said earlier, is now shown to be pretty flawed. But it does make one good point, is that, yes, there will be more jobs created, but there is a significant section of low-skilled people in the economy who are going to lose out. They will not be ready for these new higher-skilled jobs.
And so the big debate in Silicon Valley, obviously, is between universal basic income and what Mike Bloomberg calls fake jobs. So we had fake news, and now he calls it fake jobs, which is actually one of his solutions, which he publicly spoke about at Oxford last week, 2 weeks ago, is the government needs to create fake jobs to give people the dignity of a job, because so many jobs are going to be obliterated. So there is a very smart man saying he can't see it. And when I speak with the AI gurus who are real experts, and you really ask them, you know, what jobs can't be replaced by tech? Where do they think that technology can't replace all these things? You've seen the things where people say, well, you always need a supervisor. It's like, well, no, actually, a supervisor's tasks are pretty mundane anyway, and so you could replace those. And
no. You always need journalists, vicars, teachers,
nannies I saw in today's papers,
and personal trainers.
Yeah,
no, actually,
no, you don't need. We have Fitwell. We're building an artificial intelligence fitness coach called Fitwell.
Yeah, it's rubbish. One little anecdote from that Oxford study, which, as I said, was flawed. We had a job counter on the BBC website where you put in your job and found out its risk of automation, and it seemed cheery because it said accountants and lawyers were likely to be automated out of existence. We all cheered. That was probably false. But the least likely to be automated, right at the bottom, 0.4% pub landlord. So that's got to be empathy.
Some humanity, empathy. But robots can be empathetic. That's the bigger debate. Robots in Japan do look after the elderly.
Talking of empathy, I'm concerned about Silicon Valley's lack of it, potentially.
The Om Malik article in the Wall Street Journal on the lack of empathy in Silicon Valley.
Yeah,
yes.
I'm talking. Well, but I'm going to talk
about Travis's lack of empathy.
I'm going to talk. Yeah, exactly. No, I'm not going to personalise it. Joe, I think there is a wider and serious point here. Is that here we all are sitting in the UK, and what companies do we think have huge influence over our future? Facebook, Uber, Apple, Google. Where are they all from? Amazon. They're all from one small part of the world. Isn't there going to be growing hostility? Some of it well justified, some of it perhaps not, against Silicon Valley's arrogance and overreach?
Potentially. I mean, I very much hope not, because I think a lot of these companies have brought huge benefits to the cities we operate in. I mean, I don't know what most of us would do today if suddenly there wasn't Uber at the touch of a button. I think the other part that's often Well, possibly they're not doing so well. But the other part that's often forgotten actually is the economic opportunities that these companies are making. So there's 40,000 drivers across the UK who are able to get flexible work at the touch of a button, which wasn't possible before. And I don't know any other.
Will be automated out of a job within 10 years.
But then there may be other jobs. I mean, every time, for example, you'll still need people to clean the cars, replace the cars, sort out any problems, lost property, things like that. I mean, every time technology's changed. I mean, mobile phones, for example.
And progressively, they will get a smaller and smaller stake in the economy. That's the sort of dystopian vision. That yes, jobs will come, but there will be less rewarding rather than more.
I think they'll change. I also still think we are a way off that. I mean, from the point of self-driving, for example, there's not only the technological innovations, but there's also adoption and the regulatory framework around it. I do think the role of government is critical in making sure that we go through these changes and make sure that as a country we're ahead of them and leading the way, but also we're making sure we mitigate some of those side effects. I would love to see our tech centre developing more companies from the UK, of course, but I don't think the impact of all of these companies is necessarily only bad.
Could I make a
Colin.
So I think what I think is quite interesting is there is a real opportunity for the humanizing of technology. Let's call it that. So, if you think back to where Silicon Valley's come from and what it's been investing in to date, has basically been making the core kind of nuts and bolts of communication technology and computing technology work. Where we are now is that Silicon Valley's turned its attention to actually kind of reinventing real industries. So there's a very different type of person that's there today. It's not just very hardcore tech geeks that are there. It's actually people who, have a broader perspective. And I think there is a recognition that this kind of techno-utopianism is flawed and they're already seeing very strong pushback, not just from governments, but on issues of privacy, obviously, but also issues of unintended consequences of a lot of the technology. The other dimension I think is interesting where there's pushback is this idea of kind of colonialization through tech companies. So why does someone like Google or Facebook have the right to basically just colonize the world's data and then work out what it's going to do with it afterwards? So I think there's I think there is already pushback from the user perspective on some of these unintended consequences.
Ed, we've seen that pushback in Europe, perhaps more than from the UK. I mean, we look at all the issues where Google is now confronting Brussels. Are we going to see more of that?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say the French will sort it all out. I mean, if we're worried about American, US tech colonialism, it's the French who will fight it tooth and nail. But, I mean, I think at the end of the day, companies like Google and Facebook do hold quite a lot of the cards because we as consumers want to use these services. And if, for example, Google was decided to withdraw from the UK, I think people would be pretty angry about that. But there is a regulatory battle, I guess, to come. You've got these huge companies with immense power, and the idea that
regulators... And they're just waking up. I mean, the Googles and Facebooks of this world that, for instance, have always denied being media companies are now being forced to reconsider that, aren't they?
Well, exactly. You had the announcement today of Facebook, Microsoft, Twitter working together to share what images they were banning and deleting from their websites. So there is a huge social responsibility element that a lot of the social media companies haven't stepped up to and they need to step up to. And there are, I always said as a minister, there is this, it is perfectly, you get shouted down somehow you don't understand the internet or you're a censor and an interferer. But politicians reflect to a certain extent public opinion and they raise quite legitimate public policy issues. We raised it, for example, with adult content being accessible to children, and we got the tech companies to move an enormous distance in a very short period of time using their technology. And similarly, I think it is quite right for politicians to step up on these kind of issues. The use of data, banning offensive images, all those kind of things need to be debated, and the tech companies need to come to the table and not simply wash their hands of this responsibility, either by saying they're sort of mere conduits, they're just a platform, or by saying to politicians that they're Luddites who don't understand technology. I mean, in terms of jobs, I remain very much an optimist, but I do acknowledge, every time there's been an industrial revolution, there can be significant social unrest, so politicians need to be aware of that. But I think, human ingenuity is such that new jobs are created. I mean, you think about Joe's point about Uber, but also about Airbnb has created a whole industry of kind of landlords and people who manage those landlords now, as it were. So technology creates new jobs. I can't, unfortunately, rent a room because my house isn't as big as yours. But when the children move out in 10 years,
that's what we call fake news.
We'll be Airbnb-ing away.
I just want to talk a little bit more about the balance of power in technology. It's obviously been very much focused on Silicon Valley and now to a certain extent on China. Brent and I were both at a major tech festival in Helsinki, the wonderfully named Slush last week, where actually there was a surprising amount of optimism that Europe could actually compete and that there were some interesting companies coming out of Europe. Brent, do you share any of that optimism that Europe's not produced a technology giant really for quite a while, since the demise of Nokia?
Well, we have one decacorn, which is Supercell, right? So technically, $10 billion resale of Supercell. I think the report, it's interesting. I think what Atomico did, which I'm affiliated to at Slush, so Atomico published a report on very optimistic, as you say, about European tech that dominated a lot of the headlines at Slush. And I think the data is something like roughly 44 unicorns, so billion-dollar tech companies in Europe, and I think 17 or so from the UK. So the UK, as Ed said, punching above its weight, because we have actually, I do pay tribute to what the last government did in terms of championing tech. I think that was actually very important for the UK's role. However, your question, I think, really alludes to the fact that we don't have the question government constantly asks is, why don't we have a Google? Why don't we have a Facebook?
Slightly tedious question.
And the answer that I used to say, which is totally counter to where we are now, is because we didn't help companies scale fast enough across Europe. So the digital single market, I thought, was going to be very exciting for this. So it was interesting to hear Ed not quite closing the door on that. So I'd be interested to see.
You seamlessly moved us on to another theme.
Well, no, but I think it's part. Then the next bit is, how do you get ahead of the curve? Okay, so to answer your question, I think the other bit, and it was also alluded to in previous conversations, is partly what happens is, and if you look at my own company a million years ago, lastminute.com, is we weren't quite ahead enough of the curve, although we were obviously incredibly innovative and whatever. But we did have US players.
Lucky.
Yeah, we did have US players like Expedia who had a massive home market.
Yeah.
We were doing, anyway, that's something different, but it's that issue of, you get companies here, they're innovative, they just dominate their national market, they dominate a market of 80 million, therefore they naturally get acquired. And so the way to answer that perhaps is to go ahead of the curve. So it is to say, look, we are going to create a world-class player in AI, robotics, medtech, genetics. So some of these sectors that haven't yet arrived, and also play regulatory arbitrage. I think that's also what's been played very well. So if you look at drones, for example, the government has said, look, the UK will be a playground for drones, in the nicest possible terminology.
Colin, you bestride the Atlantic, as it were. You've got a global perspective. Do you see Europe continuing to punch below its weight, or what?
Well, I think Brent alluded to some of the structural challenges that I think are very hard to overcome. I think the fact that you have a very small home markets means that many of these businesses are faced with complexity to basically expand their total addressable market versus the US, for example. So they have to, and very few companies actually build to be global right from the beginning. So as a consequence, they're basically tied to the size of their local market. I think there is a difference in the entrepreneurial culture in different countries across Europe as well. There's a different attitude.
It's changing,
to risk.
Isn't it?
It is changing, but it is changing. And then I think the capital availability is a challenge. I think there is early money. There's a lot of VC money.
I always quote. Halo was briefly mentioned. Halo in this country raised $150 million, I think, and people said that is extraordinary. Wow. And then Uber came. Uber's how much has Uber raised? some ridiculous amount of money. Many. I thought it was something like 8 billion. Anyway, Joe will tell you all afterwards. It's in her back pocket.
There's not that many examples of that, across Europe, similar to people being willing to kind of swing for the fences, so to speak, and put that kind of capital behind. So I think there is a gap there as well in terms of capital. But I definitely think Europe has enormous advantages as well in terms of the sophistication of the culture, the engineering pedigree. The educational kind of history and all of those different things. So, and relating it back to your questions earlier, sorry, about the dystopian vision, versus the tech utopianism. I think Europe has an advantage because it is culturally more sensitive than other parts of the world potentially. So it may actually have an edge in this kind of idea of humanizing technology.
Yeah, Chris Sacca, some big Silicon Valley figure I interviewed last week, and he said, great thing Europe has is it's a continent where a lot of people speak more than one language, which is not true of the US, and a lot of people have more of a global outlook, frankly. So
and that can
maybe
help.
we should be.
That can help. I mean, look, the US remains by far the best place to be investing. I think that's clear, but it is not the only place to be investing, obviously. So I think that. We're very positive on Europe as a whole. I think there are certain pockets that we're particularly positive on within Europe. Let's not forget other areas of the world. I mean, we're invested in a Kenyan business, for example, and they call Nairobi kind of Silicon Savannah, right? I mean, it's sort of the idea of, you go down there, it's very entrepreneurial, very innovative, a lot of capital going in, a lot of very interesting business models that are very relevant for that region. Being developed, so let alone China, which is a whole other story.
And if I can quickly get your Brexit take, what kind of deal would you like to see the UK get that would encourage people like you to continue investing in technology firms in Britain?
I don't have a.
You don't have a view.
I mean, I have a view, but it's not worth it talking about.
What is your view?
That's not my game.
It's so depressing. I need to see a therapist.
Look, I think we have a global mandate for a reason. So, we can move around the world depending on opportunity. Let's put it that way.
Ed.
That's very pessimistic of you. Not the tone that Rory wants on this panel.
No, I like a bit of gloom. Ed, give us your optimistic vision of what Brexit means then for the technology industry.
Well, we won't know what Brexit means till next March. We're back to the beginning. We've gone full circle. So we could be Switzerland, Norway, or Canada, apparently, still. But I think, there have been encouraging noises from the Brexit secretary, and the most encouraging, the key, as Brent will know, is the access to talent. So in terms of, how do you scale up European companies, everything that's been said is absolutely right in terms of access to capital and access to skills and investment skills in particular. And the really depressing thing is, I think, we are 10 or 20 years behind Silicon Valley, but we are catching up. We were catching up. So you take a company like DeepMind, for example, 250 PhDs. That in itself is a core element of expertise in AI, which will, start to create new AI startups and so on and so forth. So, and what we have now are people cashing out of their big tech companies with huge expertise, having run tech companies, and with a lot of money in their pocket, which they can then invest in new startups. So the ecology has, grown organically.
Can I ask you a question? So DeepMind is a perfect example of a company selling itself too early, right? Because it's owned by Google now. So
well, that's a debate. I mean, I'm not here as a spokesman for DeepMind and the deal with Google.
But is that still a wider issue for the UK?
Not least computing power. But you're right. I mean, there is an element there as well of a lot of European companies potentially cashing out too early. But who am I to tell an entrepreneur who's been offered a very large check for their company not to cash out, or indeed sees it as an opportunity to partner with a bigger company and grow their company even bigger? But anyway, I digress. So the big threat for Brexit for me, the biggest threat is access to talent. We were talking about how it's difficult for a UK company or a European company to grow because its market is not as big and unified as the American market. Although don't forget that the states themselves have lots of different regulations which American companies have to overcome. The big problem for me is if you're sitting here in a UK startup, you need the best talent. At the moment, you have access to 500 million people potentially with those skills. As we leave Europe, that is a big challenge. So if the government can put talent at the top of its agenda when it's negotiating whatever new kind of visa system we have. That will be absolutely vital.
What are you betting? We'll get some kind of freedom of movement?
Oh, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think no. I think we will have to have some kind of visa system, but whether that's a relatively frictionless visa system. You know, for me, in terms of the Brexit debate and the Brexit argument, which won the referendum, freedom of movement was front and centre of what people wanted to stop. Now, if we can give quasi-freedom of movement by make it easy for people with the skills that this country needs to get visas, long-term visas and long-term work permits, so much the better. Again, don't forget, you know, we think of ourselves as in this you know, very difficult situation, but don't forget, you know, if you want to go and work in the US, you've got to get over a hell of a lot of hurdles to go and you know, Brent couldn't up sticks and go to California tomorrow.
My father's American.
I mean, I've got a US passport, Brent's got a US passport, so we're out of here. But for the rest of you, it's very difficult.
And Brent, you were very gloomy in June. Do I sense that you cheered up a bit and you think that there is the prospect of a decent deal?
Well, to be honest, I find the most annoying headlines, I find the ones that everything's all right because Brexit's happened. It hasn't happened. Yeah. So I think those headlines are absolutely incompetent. So, you know, but what I do think is that the great thing is people who are in positions of power are naturally optimists. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in a position of power. So that's why nothing has collapsed yet, because we don't think somehow, we think beyond all the rhetoric and beyond some Muppets in positions of power at the moment and debating on over
the Muppets.
The Muppets are clearly satirized brilliantly, and so they can satirize themselves better than I can do. But just despite them.
The Muppets.
I can't.
I've asked him to name the Muppets.
Despite the Muppet Show that goes on,
Well,
I
I've never
think
heard
most of us are optimistic that they can't do self-flagellation and they can't do commercial suicide. So I think the point is, despite the fact that we haven't had anybody very high up or sensible in government say skilled immigration is incredibly important, it's really vital for our country, somehow we still believe, and Google still believes because it made that $1 billion investment, and the point is Google believes it's going to happen. If it doesn't happen, Google will have to take those jobs somewhere else, and they will. And Sundar said it. If anybody read his speech, he said, we're investing in the UK because it is a multicultural talent pot. If that changes, da-da-da. So, look, I still think that it is important for the industry to keep on banging the drum and saying what is important. And actually, we're going to be doing that later today and publishing a letter to the government about what we want from Brexit.
That's breaking news.
Yeah.
Who's we?
Who's we?
Well, Brent is the technology industry.
At TechCrunch Disrupt later today.
Right.
Yeah.
And the letter will say...
The letter will say, look, it's a bunch of fairly standard things, but I think it's reinforcing that it's sort of 10 points that we'd like to see the government. Some of them are continue with, some of them are amplify, some of them are protect the brand. There's a tech brand that has been built up of the UK that has been very attractive globally because, you know, that is that convening power, that is that amplification that Ed spoke about. We haven't seen much of that since Brexit. So it's like, let's go back to more of that, thank you, because if you look at what the French are doing yesterday at TechCrunch Disrupt, saying, we're putting $1 billion in for here for skills, we're doing all this stuff. You've got the Germans marketing themselves. And so there is a global war for talent. We can't just sit here and think we've done a bit, we'll be fine because we're England.
Joe, I see you nodding. Is Uber signing this letter?
I don't know about the letter, but I'd agree. I mean, I tend to remain optimistic because we have to be. But I think one of the most important things is to continue to signal that the country is open for business and that London's open for business. And so appreciate Sadiq Khan's efforts on that and making sure that we stay open for businesses to invest here and to continue to get the talent we rely on. And it is encouraging that Oslo, for example, has a flourishing tech sector and they're not in the EU. I think there is a way around it, but we have to wait and see.
In a moment, we're going to go to Q&A. I just want to ask one slightly provocative question. You're all part of this extraordinary technology revolution of the last 10 years, which we're told has transformed our world. It's patently not transformed our economic prospects or the state of the economy. Productivity in the UK and in lots of countries seems to be flatlining. Are we overhyping, Colin? Have we overhyped what this technology revolution has been about?
Look, I mean, I think we, at Generation, our overall mission is to try and continue to prove the investing case for sustainable capitalism and sustainable business. So we recognize that there's an enormous amount of challenge in moving our capitalist system to a more sustainable footing. Technology plays a role in that, and I would argue it actually has been a very positive force. I would say that if you think about things in terms of, people are obsessed with growth, right? So what do you think the growth sectors of the future are, right? Investing in a low growth world and a low interest rate world, if you're a very large kind of asset owner, looking into technology and into sustainability are two areas where you can get growth in a low growth world. And I think that, it is slightly unfair to say that technology hasn't delivered, because what is the alternative? Is it to stay in the old model that wasn't delivering either? Would be my question back to you.
Okay. Let's go to Q&A. I'll answer that question in a minute. But
Well,
yeah, we've got somebody there. Could you say your name and...
Hi there, Wojtek from Index Ventures. I just had a question, because something we discussed also internally, which is, we talk a lot about cities, and all this innovation happens in cities because of the density, and cities are incredible hubs, but it's the cities that largely voted remain. How can we ensure, and the people in the technology sector, that some of the benefits of this technology is felt throughout the country, and that people just outside of London don't just look at flying cars over London but see no benefits from it?
What you're saying is this, and you're absolutely right, is the metropolitan elite in action. I mean, Brent, captain of the metropolitan elite. What are you doing for rural and northern England?
Well, look, clearly there is the Northern Powerhouse. No, I mean, look, I think, actually, interestingly, Yvette Cooper was someone who explained it to me very well, this, and her whole point, and she is focusing on absolutely what do you do for towns. I mean, some of it came from, I remember also looking at the report on how do you reimagine the high street, and it was literally a high street in towns. I mean, I was saying I'd love to see a fab lab in every town. Have you seen, I don't know if people know about fab labs, but this is ideas of mass customization, so machines to be able to do, teaching people how to actually make stuff. So replace some of these defunct things in towns with educational establishments like that. So I think it is about a reskilling in towns. I think obviously it is about brilliant internet connectivity, which has been hammered to death, and Ed knows more about that than anyone, but that's obviously one other element. And then there's another thing we're actually helping the government with. I've got two of my startups helping the government teach people how to export. So I think the other thing is, if you're in small towns, the internet is, as Google or Facebook, I'm sure, will tell you, is a brilliant tool to export. So teaching people how to how to manage their small businesses and view that with to export, even if it's not to Europe, even if it has to go somewhere else.
Persuading venture capital people that the world doesn't stop at the M25.
That's harder.
He says. We've got a question over here.
Hi, Robert Jerkowski from BOC Pensions. Could I get the panel's thoughts on cybersecurity and cyber terrorism, i.e. the potential for bad coming out of all the technology development?
Yeah, I mean, one area we haven't covered at all. I mean,
it's a huge issue.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about driverless cars, that's the big
the
threat.
hacking of the Internet of Things.
The more we become interconnected. And, again, the UK government has taken the cybersecurity issue very seriously, has put quite a significant amount of money in it. It did it in 2010 when we were cutting other budgets, and it did it again in 2015, and it has programs to work with businesses, both large and small, on cyber, and also GCHQ now leads, as it were, the cyber effort in government. There's one front door. The mechanisms are much clearer in terms of how you engage with government on cyber. But yes, clearly, it is the biggest issue that underpins what is going on.
I want to get Joe as
world.
somebody running a significant technology company across much of Europe. how much time do you spend worrying about the cybersecurity issue?
We've got big teams that are focused on making sure our systems are very, very secure, and hopefully industry leading engineers. It's so technical. It's not something that I personally am closely involved in. But yeah, it's been
a
big,
CEO is having to, put it higher up their list of things to worry about.
Yes, absolutely. And you've seen some of the challenges you'll have seen in the news, some of the data breaches that other companies may have, and often people use the same passwords and credentials, and then you can have security issues across a range of companies.
Colin, you got
could I just mention something else? So I think we've got to assume that just like with privacy, basically there is no more privacy, and there is nothing that is not under threat from cyber either. So I think that there's ways of designing around that. So just kind of bringing it back, for example, to the energy space, if you have centralized generating systems, you are inherently more vulnerable to cyber than a networked distributed energy system. So, we think that cyber is an arms race, and that we are losing that, and you just got to basically realize that that you will be breached, you will be attacked. So, just operate in that mindset.
No, I don't think you can actually, because I want to get one more question in. Wait for the mic.
For clean, this is Hania Sadat with Stratus Private Equity, Clean Energy. What challenges have you been facing installing these clean technologies in cities, communities, or different countries? Dealing with policymakers. Thank you.
That's presumably particularly a question for
you.
Yeah,
sure. So, sorry, what are the challenges to installing clean energy? Did you say?
Is it?
Clean energy technologies. What challenges have you been facing installing these technologies into different countries, different cities, and communities to end the climate change crisis?
Presumably,
sure.
Some countries are far more receptive.
Absolutely. I mean, look, I think
you
need
a lot of clean energy in Saudi Arabia? Or?
No, but we are in Kenya, for example.
Right.
So let me just very quickly touch on that. I mean, there's a lot of people that are off-grid in Africa, and there are new business models out there that basically leverage mobile money systems to enable people to pay as you go for their solar. So they basically pay over their mobile phone on a daily basis the same amount they were paying for kerosene before for the solar system on their roof. So you're moving people from kerosene to basically solar, which enables mobile phone charging, lighting, and a radio for the same price as kerosene. And so you need the enabling technologies to enable those kind of businesses. So cheap solar panels, cheap batteries, cheap LEDs, and ubiquitous mobile money. So the challenges are different by country, but the point I was making right at the beginning is that you've got this confluence of innovations and technologies all happening simultaneously. There is enabling new models of adoption of sustainable solutions.
We've got 2 minutes, and I'm going to end by getting each of the panel to be optimistic. I'm going to get each of them to say which tech trend they are really hoping to see in the next 5 years. What do they want to be able to see happening in society or using themselves by 2020? And Ed, because he's a politician, can think on his feet, is going to start.
I'd like to see the government crunching a lot of big data to help society, particularly in health. And so I want to see great advances in health cures based on data analysis.
You think that's going to happen?
Yep.
Good. He's so upbeat, this guy.
And then we're going to live till 120 doing fake jobs.
Or it'll feel like it anyway. Colin, we're all going to have electric cars by 2020.
I'd like to see us all move to a meat-free diet and basically a plant-based diet.
And why?
Have you done that?
Why?
Yeah.
Yes, I have done that.
Yeah, I read this about this cardiologist who's just moved to.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, I think
quite worried about
the
this.
industrialized agriculture, and particularly the meat industry, has enormous impacts on climate and enormous individual health impacts. And there are an increasing wave of technologies that allow for alternative sources of protein.
Including GM? Are you a GM positive?
Yes.
It depends on the scenario.
Right. Interesting.
But I would like to see us in 5 years move to a plant-based diet.
Okay. Brent, where would you like to see us move in 5 years?
No, I'm going to actually unfortunately
about?
agree with Ed. I mean, I think the end of aging is I was last week a panelist was championing this idea that aging will be optional soon. So, and I think that's a lovely idea.
You've opted for it.
You're looking, you're looking very good for 25.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And Joe, presumably you want us all in driverless Ubers by 2020, but apart from that.
Well, I would say an end to the need for private car ownership.
Good call.
Because you can access a range of mobility options at the touch of a button, most of which hopefully are electric.
What a brilliant note on which to end. The ticker has just gone down 1-0. Perfect ending. Thank you very much. Very good panel.